Hello everyone, today I'm going to tell you about a maritime disaster that occurred in the Mediterranean Sea. A massive luxury cruise ship carrying over 4,000 people on board struck a reef off the coast near Italy. The hull was torn open, creating a 50-meter-long gash that allowed a large amount of seawater to flood in. Subsequently, the ship began to list. However, surprisingly, the passengers on board were informed that the cruise ship had only experienced a routine power outage and that nothing serious had happened. This accident occurred exactly 100 years after the world-famous Titanic disaster. It was the Costa Concordia grounding incident that happened in 2012. In 1997, James Cameron's film Titanic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, became a global phenomenon and one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Its estimated revenue of $2.257 billion after its release also made many people more aware of this century-old event. The sinking of the Titanic cruise ship occurred in 1912. With the changing times, luxury cruise ships are no longer just a means of sea travel, but have also become a wonderful place for ideal vacations at sea. On these luxurious cruise ships, in addition to cabins and restaurants that meet basic living needs, there are also many diverse entertainment facilities suitable for all ages. Therefore, sea travel vacations are becoming increasingly popular with everyone. And today's story takes place in the Mediterranean, home to many luxury cruise lines. One of the most famous cruise companies is Costa Crociere. Costa Crociere is an Italian cruise line with origins dating back to the Costa family of Italy in 1860. In 1997, Carnival Corporation, a well-known American cruise company, acquired 50% of Costa Crociere. The addition of a new shareholder boosted the company to unprecedented achievements. Since then, in just a few years, Costa Crociere has built several large luxury cruise ships. In 2004, the company placed an order for a brand new luxury cruise ship from the world-renowned shipbuilding group called Fincantieri. The group is headquartered in Italy. It is the fourth largest shipyard in the world and the largest cruise shipbuilder globally. After receiving the order from Costa Crociere, they immediately began designing and manufacturing a new cruise ship. This new cruise ship was named Costa Concordia. 2 years later, the ship was completed and put into commercial operation. Let's take a look at the structure of the ship. The Costa Concordia was 290.2 meters long, 35.5 meters wide, and 52 meters high, with a displacement of 114,100 tons and a maximum speed of 23 knots per hour, approximately 26.47 miles per hour, about 42.6 kilometers per hour. The total cost to complete the ship was an astonishing 450 million euros, approximately 600 million US dollars at the time. At that time, it was one of the most luxurious cruise ships owned by Costa Crociere. This is an image comparing the Costa Concordia in 2012 and the Titanic in 1912. As you can see, the Costa Concordia was larger than the Titanic. The Costa Concordia was equipped with 1,500 cabins, of which 505 had private balconies. There were also 58 suites, 4 swimming pools, 5 spas, and 5 restaurants on board. There was even a casino, a disco, and a grand theater, etc. All facilities and amenities on board were fully equipped. It can be said that the ship had everything you needed, just like a mobile city at sea. The Costa Concordia's route was mainly in the western Mediterranean. It had also operated very smoothly since its launch in 2006. However, 5 years later, an unexpected disaster occurred. Many people likened it to a new Titanic disaster. So, what happened that day? Why could such a huge ship run aground? Next, let's rewind time to January 13th, 2012. January 13th, 2012, it was a Friday, 7 p.m., Nueva Horas. The super-luxury cruise ship Costa Concordia, carrying 4,232 people from over 70 countries, departed the port of Civitavecchia in Italy on time. Among the over 4,000 people on board, more than 3,000 were passengers and over 1,000 were crew members. The ship slowly left the dock and began its 7-day cruise around the Western Mediterranean. The entire journey would last 7 days, with the starting point being the port of Civitavecchia. During the voyage, the ship would stop at 6 different ports. After completing a full circle, the ship would return to its starting point on the final day. The Costa Concordia targeted the Italian domestic market, so this was not the first time the ship had sailed this route. After departing, the Costa Concordia traveled on the calm waters of the Western Mediterranean at a speed of 15 knots. The massive hull looked dazzling at night. At that time, the Costa Concordia was heading towards its next destination, the port of Savona in northwestern Italy. The captain of the ship was Francesco Schettino, an Italian born in 1960. He joined Costa Crociere in 2002 and was promoted to captain in 2006. He had also been the captain of the Costa Concordia since its launch. By 2012, the ship had sailed safely for over 5 years. As the Costa Concordia left port, Captain Francesco Schettino, 52 years old, stepped onto the stage. On behalf of the entire crew and staff on board, he welcomed everyone. After the speech, all staff were present and the dining and entertainment facilities were opened. Everything was operated and managed in an orderly manner. According to the planned route that night, the ship would travel between mainland Italy and Giglio Island. Because the sea in between the two is deeper, it is not easy to run aground, and this was also the ship's usual route. However, that day was slightly different from the usual procedure. The captain ordered a change in course, but due to a miscalculation that made the ship's turning radius too large, the actual route that night shifted westward. The ship was too close to the shore, almost heading directly north along Giglio Island. At 9:45 p.m., the ship moved close to Giglio Island. Due to being too close to the shore, the port side of the ship struck a reef on the seabed. It seemed like a minor collision. In reality, the damage to the hull was enormous. The moment of impact caused the passengers on board to feel a strong rocking and vibration. Then, the ship's electrical equipment malfunctioned. All the lights went out. A few seconds later, the emergency lights came on. Those enjoying dinner in the restaurant were terrified. Food and drinks fell to the floor, and no one was in the mood to continue eating. From mobile phone footage taken by passengers, it can be seen that everyone was very frightened after the collision, not knowing what had happened. Restaurant staff also tried their best to maintain order and calmly guide people out of the restaurant. So, how serious was the collision? The collision caused water to flood several compartments of the hull, including the engine room, machinery spaces, and 2 generator rooms. The Costa Concordia had a total of 7 watertight compartments. A watertight compartment is an independent section inside the hull. Its function is to prevent water ingress in the event of an accident. When the hull is damaged and water floods in, the undamaged watertight compartments will continue to provide buoyancy and prevent or slow down the sinking process. Normally, when a ship is flooded, if the watertight compartments are not breached, there is still a chance of rescue. However, the ship struck rocks and was damaged, causing 3 of the 7 watertight compartments to flood. It can be described as extremely serious damage. 10 minutes after the collision, the ship's public address system came on. However, the truth was not announced to the passengers on board. Instead, they were informed that the ship had experienced a power outage and that everything was under control. At the same time, passengers were also told to stay in their rooms and not to worry.
We're currently in a blackout as we've experienced electrical failure. At this point, the situation is...
At that point, many passengers did not believe what was being broadcast on the radio. They kept wondering why the violent shaking just now was just a routine power outage. Many passengers had put on life jackets and left their rooms. However, most people still believed the announcements on the loudspeaker and stayed in their rooms without going out, trying to calm the emotions of some passengers. The ship also sent staff to reassure everyone. They explained the reason and asked everyone to quickly return to their rooms because the technical issue would soon be resolved. At that time, the captain realized the seriousness of the situation. He immediately contacted the company's crisis management center and reported to them what was currently happening on the ship. However, after learning about the incident, the company's crisis management and control center did not report it to any other units. Clearly, the company had not yet realized the severity of the problem. The collision had damaged the ship's propulsion system, and the ship lost power. The ship's speed had decreased from 15 knots per hour to 6.6 knots per hour after 5 minutes of the collision, and then continued to drop to 2.9 knots per hour after another 4 minutes. At 10:02 p.m., the ship's speed had dropped to 1.1 knots per hour. At that point, the ship was only relying on its small inertia to turn 180 degrees and try to head towards the coast of Giglio Island. However, after turning 180 degrees, the ship's speed dropped to 0. The ship could be blown by the wind towards the shore, and the closer to the shore, the higher the chances of survival for everyone. At 10:10 p.m., strong winds had pushed the powerless ship to the north, about 100 meters from the village of Porto on Giglio Island. It was at this point that the captain realized the situation was dire, and he finally called the Italian Coast Guard for help and ordered the crew to abandon ship. The entire crew began evacuating passengers. After the order to abandon ship was given, the ship's alarm sounded. At the same time, the loudspeaker announced to all passengers to put on life jackets, gather on the nearest deck, and evacuate via the lifeboats. At that time, a large amount of water had flooded the cabins, causing the ship to list 25 degrees to starboard. This made it difficult for people to move around the ship. Some elderly passengers had even more difficulty moving. As seawater continued to flood in, the entire ship's generator system failed. The water pumps also stopped working. The crew could do nothing but watch the ship tilt to starboard at an increasingly large angle. Everything was irreversible and beyond control. At that time, more and more passengers gathered on the deck. The crew lowered the lifeboats hanging on both the port and starboard sides of the ship one by one. Rescue ships arriving at the scene were also present to assist in evacuating people. The elderly, women, and children were given priority to board the lifeboats first. Although some disputes occurred during the evacuation process, overall order was maintained. But after all, human lives were at stake, and the atmosphere at the scene was very tense. Occasionally, screams and cries for help from passengers could be heard. As time passed, the tilt angle of the entire ship increased. Every minute and every second was precious. As the lifeboats were lowered one after another, more and more people were successfully evacuated. The crew and rescue workers were extremely busy, but Captain Francesco Schettino, who should have been present at the scene to direct operations, was nowhere to be found. The crew searched for him and needed him to issue some regulations. But they could not find him. In fact, the captain had already boarded a lifeboat early on. He had escaped the ship and reached the coast of Giglio Island safely. However, he was soon discovered. Captain Gregorio De Falco of the Italian Coast Guard, who was on duty that night, discovered that Captain Francesco Schettino had come ashore while he was directing the rescue operation, and the following conversation took place.
Pronto? Sì, buonasera comandante. Senta, io sono De Falco da Livorno, parlo col comandante? Sì, buonasera comandante Di Falco. Mi dica il suo nome per favore. Sono il comandante Schettino, comandante. Schettino? Sì. Ascolti Schettino, ci sono persone intrappolate a bordo, adesso lei va con la sua scialuppa sotto la prua della nave, lato dritto, c'è una biscaggina. Lei sale su quella biscaggina e va a bordo della nave. Va a bordo della nave e mi viene a dire, mi riporta quante persone ci sono. Le è chiaro? Io sto registrando questa comunicazione, comandante Schettino. Allora, comandante, le dico una cosa. Parli a voce alta. Allora, la nave adesso, io sono qua di fronte... Comandante, parli a voce... In questo momento, la nave è inclinata... Ho capito. C'è gente, ascolti, c'è gente che sta scendendo dalla biscaggina di prua. Lei quella biscaggina la percorre in senso inverso, sale sulla nave e mi dice quante persone e che cosa hanno a bordo, chiaro? Mi dice se ci sono bambini, donne o persone bisognose di assistenza e me ne dice il numero di ciascuna di queste categorie. È chiaro? Guardi Schettino che lei si è salvato forse dal mare, ma io la porto veramente molto male, faccio passare l'anima dei guai. Vado a bordo, cazzo! Comandante, per cortesia. Che sta facendo, comandante? Sto qua per coordinare i soccorsi. Che sta coordinando lì? Vado a bordo, mi coordini i soccorsi da bordo. Lei si rifiuta? No, non mi sto rifiutando. Lei si sta rifiutando di andare a bordo, comandante? No, e mi dica qual è il motivo per cui non ci va. Sto andando perché ci sta l'altra lancia che si è fermata. Lei vada a bordo, è un ordine. Però ma si rende conto che è buio e che qua non vediamo nulla. E che vuole tornare a casa, Schettino? È buio, vuole tornare a casa? Salga sulla prua della nave tramite la biscaggina e mi dica ora.
It was evident that Captain Fanco of the Coast Guard was furious at the indifferent behavior of Captain Francesco at that time. He loudly berated the ship's captain and demanded that he return to the ship to direct the rescue efforts. The audio recording of this conversation was subsequently widely publicized in the mass media. Captain Fanco also became a well-known figure for his outspoken criticism of the ship captain's irresponsible conduct. In late 2018, Captain Fanco was elected to the Italian Senate. However, despite Captain Fanco's reprimand that night, Captain Francesco did not return to the ship to take command. Meanwhile, the other crew members continued the rescue operation on board. Some enthusiastic residents on the island also provided accommodation for some of the rescued passengers. As the ship listed further to the right, the rescue situation became increasingly perilous. Especially for the passengers who had not yet been rescued, those moments were a desperate struggle for survival. While the rescue was still underway, a heart-stopping scene unfolded. When seawater entered hold number 4, the ship tilted to the right more rapidly, causing the lifeboats on the ship to become unusable. However, because the list to the right was not too severe, the lifeboats on the other side could no longer be lowered into the water. At that point, there were not enough lifeboats on board, leaving some passengers unable to board them. In a split-second decision between life and death, they chose to take a risk, jumping into the icy water to swim ashore, hoping for a chance of survival. This decision resulted in many injuries, and some even drowned. There were still 300 passengers waiting to be evacuated on the ship. The ship continued to list to the right and eventually hit the seabed and came to a stop. The entire port side of the ship was submerged in seawater. With the ship listing at an 80-degree angle from the water's surface, the remaining passengers could only rely on a rope to slowly climb down to the lifeboats on the water. Fortunately, most of the remaining passengers were strong men. They were physically fit and also assisted in completing the rescue until the very last moment. The elderly, women, and children were taken onto the lifeboats first, which of course included the ship's captain. The only correct action taken by the ship's captain was to turn the ship's bow towards the shore before it lost all power, guiding it towards the coast of Giglio Island. If the ship had been stranded in the middle of the sea, it would certainly have sunk completely, leading to a more serious disaster. The entire rescue operation lasted throughout the night. At 6:17 a.m., the initial rescue work was completed and most passengers had been rescued. However, the final incident tragically claimed the lives of 32 people and many others were injured. Among the 32 unfortunate victims were 5 crew members. They had tried until their last breath to help the passengers evacuate, but were unable to escape themselves. Their spirit and high sense of responsibility were truly commendable. The primary cause of death for most of the victims was the ship's capsizing, the flooding of the lower decks, and the inability to escape in time. Many people were also trapped in elevators and could not get out. It is hard to imagine the fear and despair they must have experienced in the final moments of their lives. The controlling shareholder of Costa Concordia paid $13,000 in compensation to each survivor. This amount included the cost of the cruise ticket and other compensation. Costa Concordia subsequently issued an assessment of the accident. Captain Francesco brought the ship too close to the shore and did not adhere to the company's safety regulations when handling the emergency situation. In some cases, his handling of the emergency even violated international standards. Most of the equipment on board was damaged and no longer usable. Please take a look at this photo with me. There is a large gash on the port side of the ship where it struck the rocks. The company determined that the damage caused by the accident exceeded the ship's cost of 450 million euros, so we decided to abandon repairing the vessel. Following this, the next thing we needed to do was salvage the ship. However, pulling the massive 114,100-ton ship out of the water was not easy. The company responsible for the salvage operation was a Dutch marine services company called Smit Salvage. They had extensive experience in ship salvage. Subsequently, a large-scale project was initiated. First, they used oil pumps to extract 2,380 tons of fuel from the ship to reduce its weight. Then they used steel cables to reinforce the seabed so that the ship would not sink further. On the port side of the ship, they fixed several large flotation tanks and then planned to use steel cables to pull the ship upright. After completing all the preparations in September 2013, the Costa Concordia was successfully raised from the water according to plan. The first phase of the salvage operation was complete. The next step was to plan the transportation of the ship to a designated location in the harbor. On July 27, 2014, 14 escort vessels transported the sunken ship to the port over 4 days. After that, the ship was brought to the dock for dismantling. By that time, the total cost of salvaging the ship had reached 1.5 billion euros, approximately $2 billion. Meanwhile, the cost of the ship itself was only 450 million euros, approximately $600 million. The entire salvage and dismantling project was also extremely complex. The Costa Concordia had also been involved in a previous accident when it struck the dock in Palermo in 2008. National Geographic Channel is a documentary television channel produced by National Geographic Partners. The channel has some program characteristics similar to Discovery Channel, such as nature, science, and history documentaries. The channel has a program called Drain the Costa Concordia. The documentary details how they carried out the project to salvage the giant ship. After the accident, Captain Francesco Schettino was placed under house arrest in Meta di Sorrento in Italy, and manslaughter charges awaited him. Following the incident, the Italian media heavily criticized Captain Francesco Schettino. They called him a coward, and some media outlets even directly labeled him the most hated man in Italy. Costa Concordia also terminated his contract and refused to pay his legal fees. In addition to Captain Francesco Schettino, 5 other crew members also abandoned ship early, including the crisis management director, the cabin service director, the first officer, the helmsman, and the third officer. These 5 admitted their fraudulent behavior and all pleaded guilty. The court sentenced them to prison terms ranging from 18 to 34 months. On February 23, 2013, the trial of the ship's captain began. He was charged with 3 counts: manslaughter causing a shipwreck and abandoning passengers. According to his testimony, the reason for deviating from the route that night was to perform a sail-by salute. This salute was intended to pay homage to the island and had to be performed as close to the coast as possible. A sail-by salute is a tradition in Italy, Greece, and other regions. It is considered a historical ritual. When a large ship passes by, they try to get as close to the shore as possible. People on the ship and people on the island greet each other. This ritual is still maintained today. This was not the first time the Costa Concordia had performed such a sail-by salute. Previously, someone had taken a picture of the Costa Concordia passing by the island. The ship blew its horn as it passed, greeting the people on the island. Although the trip had a commercial purpose this way, passengers could witness an ancient ritual and the beautiful scenery of the island. In addition, the ship's captain told investigators that the rocks the Costa Concordia struck were not marked on the nautical charts. I thought there was still quite a bit of water under the ship. At that time, the ship was about 300 meters away from the rocks. After the incident, the Italian media revealed details about Captain Francesco Schettino's personal life, stating that he was having an affair. His mistress was a Moldovan dancer named Domnica Simortin. Initially, she did not admit her relationship with the ship's captain, but later in court, she confessed to being his lover, even though he was married. She claimed, "I boarded the ship on the day of the accident without a ticket." She added, "When you are the lover of a crew member, they don't ask for your ticket." It was reported that the captain had brought her on board that night, but she declined to reveal further details as it was her private life. Captain Francesco Schettino denied that the accident was related to his mistress. He stated, "I saved more lives by trying to steer the ship closer to the shore." When asked by the prosecutor why he abandoned the passengers and boarded a lifeboat early, he claimed, "I was directing operations on the bridge and accidentally tripped and fell into a lifeboat." Naturally, no one believed this absurd answer except perhaps himself. On February 11, 2015, after a 19-month trial, the verdict for the irresponsible coward was announced. The court found Captain Francesco Schettino guilty of leaving his post without permission and abandoning passengers, and held him clearly responsible for the accident. The Italian Supreme Court concluded that Captain Francesco Schettino was guilty of all 3 charges and sentenced him to 16 years in prison, 10 years for manslaughter, 5 years for his responsibility in the shipwreck, and 1 year for abandoning passengers. After the verdict, he expressed dissatisfaction and appealed to the appellate court and the Supreme Court again in 2016 and 2017. However, the court ultimately upheld the initial verdict. Today, luxury sea travel is increasingly favored by many people. Whether it is a means of transportation or a mobile resort, the safety of sea voyages is the most important thing. Every accident serves as a wake-up call for future generations to prepare carefully for all situations to avoid making similar mistakes. Everyone hopes that such tragedies will never happen again. There is one detail I wonder if everyone noticed. The day the ship sank was Friday the 13th. There is a widespread belief that Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky day in many Western countries. Currently, this belief has also somewhat influenced the thinking of many people in Eastern countries. They believe that many unlucky and unfortunate things will happen on Friday the 13th. Therefore, many people limit going out of their homes and avoid traveling, shopping, or doing business on that day. What do you think about Friday the 13th and the Costa Concordia sinking disaster? Today's video ends here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next videos. Goodbye.